From October 2003 to the following September, Bobby Ray Summers, an unmarried janitor in his early 30s, terrorized the small town of Dublin, Massachusetts. In a crime spree lasting 11 months, 3 days, and 4 hours, 12 people were kidnapped. The bodies of 3 of the victims were soon discovered in a heavily wooded area on the outskirts of town. 6 others, 5 women plus a middle-aged insurance agent, were never found. 3 of Ray Summers' victims managed to survive their ordeal and eventually give testimony at his 39-minute trial. Bobby Ray Summers, Ray, as his family called him, was the second child of Doris and Leo Summers. Doris, a housewife prone to extended bouts of cooking and sobbing, remained mostly at home, a modest 3-bedroom split level 20 miles northwest of Boston. Leo, a mostly absent father, was by day a salesman at a Boston area carpeting showroom. To supplement his income, Leo would spend 7 nights a week at a second job as master of ceremonies at a downtown Boston strip club.
Ray was born 6 months premature. Naturally, we worried this would be a problem later on. As we feared, the problem started when Ray was only 2 years old. He had trouble crawling, and he certainly couldn't walk by that age. Later, in elementary school, he played hooky a lot with his friends. Also, his father was away frequently, at the carpet factory or selling on the road. We think now this is what gave Ray his low self-esteem, and consequently, he stayed to himself a lot.
He'd watch the Saturday morning TV shows. Then, the rest of the day, he'd go outside and torture small birds and animals. We could hear them yelping from the backyard or down in the basement. He also liked to make these crude homemade bombs. I mean, he'd keep the whole neighborhood awake with his explosions.
My parents were very repressed people. They never talked about sex in front of me. I don't even think they had sex themselves. The funny thing is, my father worked in a strip club. He wanted to make more money, supplement his income. And he'd come home the next day and I'd be inside studying. And for no reason, he'd start beating me with a broom or baseball bat or a leather belt. And he'd switch back to broom and then belt again.
Ray's childhood was unremarkable. The occasional youthful prank, beatings by Leo, shouting and screaming, more youthful pranks, followed by prolonged, expensive therapy. The beatings usually occurred on Saturday morning after Leo, exhausted and drunk, returned home from a long night at the strip club.
Leo, Ray claims that you sometimes beat him with a broom handle.
Oh, no. We would never do that. We would never hit Ray. He was our son, our boy.
He has an old tape recording of you actually beating him.
Well, yes, I did hit him once with a vacuum cleaner hose, but once only.
Occasionally, the beatings were administered by Ray's older sister, Rhonda, a popular cheerleader and member of a local motorcycle gang.
Did your daughter beat him too?
Never. Rhonda was very kind to Ray, and also popular at school. She was the apple of our eye. She'd never hurt Ray in any way. Well, except maybe once.
When was that?
Well, she once tried to burn his eyes out with a blowtorch.
I had a lot of friends, so I guess you could say I was popular. Maybe very popular. I was president of my class and even planned to go on to college, to Princeton. I guess I blame Ray I never got there.
Bobby, did you have a good relationship with your sister?
Oh, my sister. She was always considerably more popular than me, which isn't saying much. I really didn't notice her too much growing up. She was always out of the house, dating boys, or on the road with her motorcycle gang.
He was always keeping me up at night with his TV, his music, always playing Mozart in his room on the stereo, late into the night.
She and the gang would come home late at night, and if I was asleep, they'd attack me in my bed. One time I was in the garage, and they attacked me with chains for looking at their motorcycles.
He also liked animals. And then, of course, there was the bomb making. Ray used to make homemade bombs in the basement. He'd mix up the chemicals in his room, then late at night, he'd explode them in the woods behind the house, waking me up in the middle of the fucking night.
No, I never made bombs. All that I did was mix a little black powder together and put a fuse in it, and then light the fuse and then get away. But to actually make a bomb that could hurt someone, that was something I never did.
Did you like animals?
Well, when I was young, I liked animals a lot. But then when I was 6, I got stung by a hornet. And after that, I hated them. Since that time, I thought if I got stung by a hornet or a wasp again, that I would die. At least that's what my sister told me.
It was the TV, though, that really got to me. It got to the point where I couldn't focus, I couldn't function in school. Then in my junior year, I got a B+ in English Lit and probably ruined my chances of getting into Princeton. I got into drugs for a while. Then I got married and had 5 kids, and we struggled for a while living on welfare, so obviously Princeton was out at that point.
Did you ever hit Ray?
Did I ever hit Ray? Maybe once, on the back of the head with an ironing board, but he had it coming. He kept me from getting into Princeton.
His father and I tried to get him to make some friends, but Ray, he liked to be alone a lot. Again, we think because of the low self-esteem. If you're confident, you want to be with people. He also wasn't the most attractive boy.
Did you love him?
Of course we loved him. He was our son. We had to.
I think I first met Ray, I was in the 7th grade. We were both smoking in the boys' room, which was a little weird right there because he couldn't have been more than 8. Little fucker hadn't quite got the hang of it yet. He caught my shirt on fire when he tried to light his. On account of he was so much shorter, we were both standing on the same toilet. Yeah, we only lived about a mile from each other, so we always sort of ran into each other on the street. Literally. I ran him over with my bicycle one day. Said I was sorry, then I ran him over again. After that, we're together almost constantly.
Bobby, did you have a lot of friends growing up?
I had one good friend growing up, Frank DeSalvo. We used to play hooky a lot together. We go down to the beach and throw rocks at seagulls. Then we go down to the dump and throw rocks at whatever kids we'd see there. And then we'd throw rocks at each other.
We did some crazy stuff, man.
Like what?
You know, play hooky together, look for girls. We used to go out to the beach and shoot gulls with this pellet gun that I owned. Ray said it was a real piece of shit, though. Said if he ever got any real money, he was going to get some serious weaponry.
Like what kind?
Well, he wasn't real specific about it. He was only 12. Later on, he did say something about getting a low-grade nuclear device from the Pakistanis or something.
Did you ever try to build an atomic bomb?
No. That's totally crazy and ridiculous. All that happened was when I was 8, I found some government books in the library on how to build a simple fission device, and also some pamphlets on plutonium enrichment. But it became obvious pretty quickly that the process was way too complicated for an 8-year-old, or even a 10-year-old. So I gave up and bought some firecrackers from a man down the street.
The thing about Ray was he hated to do homework, just hated it. Hell, he'd pay me $10 just to write an essay for him on, I don't know, Greek mythology or some shit. Hawthorne, D.H. Lawrence, who I always thought was a fucking queer. Wouldn't take a test, no kind of test, not even for a driver's license. I don't know if he ever did take one. Used mine for a couple years. He thought it was beneath him to be measured against somebody else. I was in the Marines, you know. 20 years. Seen some twisted shit, man, some twisted shit. But the craziest thing I ever saw, was the night I ran into Ray a couple years ago outside the laundromat. Been reading these dark German philosophers. Nietzsche, of course. Some dickhead named Schopenhauer, when it was me, not him, who seen the real deal. The real deal, Mr. Up Close and Personal. Gotcha, motherfucker! I think Ray Summers was a decent guy. A little crazy, maybe, but he was a good guy, and I hope he gets out of prison. And real soon, too, so we can go, what was it he used to call it? Quiff. So we can go chase some quiff together. Shit.
Naturally shy and still unable to wash his face properly, Ray began to retreat, spending most of his days either in his bedroom watching TV, in the basement listening to classical music, or at one of several area art museums, brooding over the works of Edvard Munch and the early Surrealists. A poor, frequently absent student, when Ray did attend class here at the John Wilkes Booth Memorial High School, he showed little enthusiasm and even less promise.
To tell you the truth, I really didn't know Ray Summers that well. Actually, nobody knew Ray Summers that well. The only things I can specifically recall about him are that he was well below average and consistently disruptive, always sitting in the back of the class, acting silly with a few of the others, or reading some smutty novel. He also exuded a rather strange odor, as if he hadn't bathed or brushed his teeth in a while. The other students ignored him mostly. I mean, when they could, because of the, the odor. But then he'd get louder and increasingly boisterous until, well, finally, I'd have to send him down to the principal's office. On a number of occasions, he sat in that office for 2 weeks. Once, I recall, he was there for an entire month. He also cheated a lot.
How did he do that?
How? Quite simply, by stealing other students' test papers. He'd reach over and grab the exam off the other student's desk and then sign his name to it. Or he'd write copious cheat notes on his hands and arms, sometimes even his legs. His limbs would be completely covered with detailed cheat notes.
Did you cheat on tests in school?
No, I never cheated in school.
Your teacher said you cheated.
Well, whoever said that is completely and utterly out of line.
Miss Prim from 8th grade.
Miss Prim? That old witch? What a witch. No. I may have written some essays right out of the book, or caught some answers by accident, but a lot of kids did that. But cheating in school is something I never did.
I tried to speak to his parents about it, but apparently they'd already issued a restraining order on him.
For what reason?
I believe he threatened them with a Gatling gun. I'm not surprised the boy ended up where he did. I think if he hadn't cheated and had done his homework like all the others, he wouldn't be in prison right now. As I like to say, those that don't pick up the pen end up in the pen, and those that smell like a pig pen end up in the pig. Well, I suppose malodor is not a jailing offense, but perhaps it should be. Are we through?
Ray and I met in the 9th grade. We sat next to each other in home economics. I remember from the beginning he was very shy, or pretended to be. He was always covering his face with his hand, like he didn't want me to see it. I remember he wasn't exactly the handsomest guy in the world, but he wasn't the ugliest either. I guess he was pretty average, really. I could tell he liked me the way he used to drool him on his desk when he looked at me. But getting him to actually talk to me, other than a few incomprehensible grunts, well, that was another thing.
Jennifer Larson? Oh, Jennifer was a girl I met in high school. The only thing I remember about her is I ran her over with my bike.
Accidentally?
No, I ran her over on purpose so she'd notice me.
One day, I was walking home from school, and Ray ran me over with his bike. He explained that his dog had died, and then he offered to walk me the rest of the way home. Eventually, I got up the courage to ask him if he wanted to go to the football game together.
What did he say?
He said he couldn't. He said he was busy. More specifically, he said something about having to blow something up.
Most people sort of didn't notice me. I usually had to do something drastic, like running them over with my bike or stuffing a firecracker up their nose.
3 years later, when we finally did go out, all he talked about was music, insects, and blowing things up. I never actually saw him blow anything up, but people, some of the mean kids at school, they told me Bobby Ray did things like that.
She was naive, a little ugly. She was nice. I'm sure wherever she is, she'll be happy, as long as no one runs her over with their bike.
Graduating from high school in 6 years and still living at home with Doris and Leo, Ray began to look for work. But with no personal connections, plus a chronic skin problem which had left an unsightly rash on the side of his neck, even the most menial position seemed out of reach. Finally, following an exhausting 2-day search, Ray located a job he'd hold for the next 11 years as the assistant night shift janitor at the local Save Mart.
I remember Ray Summers. He came into the store one night looking for a job. I remember noticing that he was kind of strange looking, not much of a personality, kind of a blank, if you know what I mean. Unresponsive, that's the word for it. And his clothes were covered with what I took to be small dried droplets of blood. I asked him about the blood, and he said it was paint from a watercolor he was working on after Monet. For some reason during the interview he talked about roadkill, and he talked about Mozart. In fact, during the entire interview he talked about roadkill and Mozart, how Mozart was born in Salzburg and traveled through Europe extensively with his father when he was a young man. Well, I took it to mean he probably didn't have a father growing up. You know, no one to give him direction and support in the home. So I gave him a shot at the store. I made him the assistant night shift janitor, just to see if it would work out. Unfortunately, it didn't. He, Ray Summers, terrorized Carmen, one of our night shift employees, while she was restocking. He backed her into a corner with a hedge trimmer and made her sing an aria from the Magic Flute. We don't hire kidnappers or rapists at Save Mart. We hire the best workers we can. And then we pay them as little as possible.
Ray explained to his supervisor that his dog had died. The explanation worked, and Ray was rehired 2 hours later. Soon earning $65 a week before taxes, Ray was finally making money. Now, 27, he was also intensely lonely and sexually frustrated. Cruising Dublin in Leo's station wagon, Ray sought satisfaction from local prostitutes. Finding them was easy. He preferred streetwalkers, either downtown behind the liquor store or uptown in front of the Episcopal Church. He liked his girls short and blonde. The shorter and blonder, the better. He also liked ones who'd listen to his requests for intercourse, but also to the car radio, which frequently played Schubert, his second favorite composer just after Mozart. After a short negotiation, the pair would drive across town, check into a room Ray had reserved earlier, then have kinky all-night sex. For Ray, the kinkier the sex, the better.
Sure, I remember Ray Summers. He used to pick me up across from the Episcopal Church, or maybe it was behind the library. It was like 2 fucking years ago, so who remembers, right? I was doing my usual thing, dating the Johns, taking drugs, eating a lot of trans fatty foods. He was nice, actually. I mean, compared to the others.
Did you go to hookers?
Yes, but I never had sex with them.
You never had sex?
Yeah, that is correct.
What did you do?
Well, we talked about whatever happened to be on my mind at the time, or what happened to be on the girl's mind, if she had a mind.
Did you ever have sex with him?
Did we have sex? Sure we had sex. Although the first couple of times, all he wanted to do was kiss my knees. But once, he asked me if I'd put on this clown suit he brought with him. He said he was trying to overcome his fear of clowns and that if he fucked a clown, he'd be cured. So I was like, okay.
Did you ever wear a clown suit?
Yeah, I think I did, once or twice.
Why did you wear a clown suit?
Well, because I wanted to show the girl that I could be as colorful as she was. even more so. See, it was my goal to show women that even a man like me could be the center of attention, especially if there were just two of us in the room.
But this was the weirdest thing. Once, he asked me to go over to the bookstore and buy a book for him. Not just any book, but this one particular book. He said he'd give me $10 extra to do it, and so I did it because I didn't want to lose him as a customer. I even remember the title, Man's Search for Meaning. I looked over the first few pages, but hey, I didn't even graduate high school, let alone college, so I didn't know what the fuck it meant. When I read about Ray Summers in the paper, I wasn't surprised. I mean, seeing the clown suit and the book and everything, like I said, the guy was a fucking weirdo. Nice, but a fucking weirdo.
For Ray Summers, paying for sex was simple and impersonal. A steady, understanding girlfriend was another matter, maybe even impossible for a man like Ray Summers. Continuing to cruise many of the local bars, pool halls, and sculpture gardens, Ray's frustration steadily grew. First into anger, then irony, then, eventually, into sarcasm.
One day, this letter came in the mail. It had drool all over it, so I opened it very carefully, and it was from Ray saying he missed me, which was kind of strange because we'd only gone out once together officially. That summer, when I came home from college, I saw Ray at the library. He'd filled out a little, and I thought that maybe now that he was a little more mature and his skin had improved, he'd find the courage to ask me out. Unfortunately, he didn't. But then, after I called him 4 times, he finally agreed to go out. A few days later, I saw him at the post office, and I asked him if he wanted to go to the beach for the day. We did that, and almost immediately I realized something was very, very wrong with him, because at the beach he started screaming at this guy for kicking sand on one of his books.
Which book was that?
It was No Exit by Jean-Paul Sartre. Anyway, in the car going home, I told him he shouldn't yell at people, and ironically, he started yelling at me for saying that. I tried calling him a few times later, but he never returned my call. I guess because of what had happened at the beach.
Yeah, I noticed Ray was becoming increasingly sarcastic. Everything's a big fucking joke to Ray, even death. I didn't ask him about it. But if I had to guess, I figured he's been reading too many of those books, especially that dickhead Schopenhauer. I think that asshole would have killed him if he kept it up.
Frank DeSalvo says you eventually became very sarcastic. What, in your opinion, caused this?
No, I disagree with that. I did not become sarcastic. I think Frank did. He was in Vietnam. He'd seen death and horrors of wartime close up. Well, I just seen them on TV and movies and comic books. And so I think Frank was much more sarcastic than I was. If anything, I was probably more ironic.
Ray's increasing sarcasm, combined with a vivid imagination and no regular girlfriend, led ultimately to creation. With his nights free after the Save Mart, he began to work on what was to become a 900-page romantic novel set during the Civil War entitled Gone with the Wind. Ray mailed the manuscript to 4,000 publishers, but none was interested after realizing the novel had already been written 60 years before. Determined to be a published author, Ray wrote a 26-page comic book, then finally a movie script. The script would be for a horror film, the type of film he'd seen hundreds of times at the local Cineplex or on TV. Loosely autobiographical, Titanic Press concerned 3 attractive teenagers caught in the clutches of a maniacal carpet salesman in the frozen tundra just below the Arctic Circle.
I saw Ray one time downtown in front of a car wash, and I asked him what he was doing. He said he was working on a script, you know, for a movie. And I asked him what it was about, but he wouldn't tell me. All he'd tell me is that if I gave him $5,000, he'd give me a part in it. Well, I think the guy was full of shit. But that was Ray. I mean, he was always working on something that never panned out. I told him he should go to work for the post office like me.
What did he say?
Well, he told me to go fuck myself.
Several people close to Ray during this period refused to talk about him, or in some cases even admit knowing him. At his job at the Safe Mart, Ray's responsibilities had steadily grown until finally, 2 days short of his 30th birthday, he was made head janitor. Now earning close to $200 a week, Ray saved everything and soon had enough money to make a down payment on a home, hopefully far from Doris and Leo. Cruising the outskirts of Dublin for a property he could afford, Ray settled on an abandoned farmhouse at the edge of town. He paid the delinquent taxes on it, signed the required paperwork, then moved in 4 minutes later.
Ray came over one night and told us he was going to buy his own home. Of course, we had to laugh.
Why?
Because in his whole life, the boy never had any money, not even for bus fare. What we didn't know is that he saved everything he earned on his job, and soon he had more money than we did, which is not saying much, since we were poor people, like church mice we were.
My husband, the schlepper.
Ray continued to work on his screenplay. Writing, then rewriting, he finished the 167-page opus in a burst of energy, lasting an hour and a half. Determined to make a feature-length Hollywood-quality movie, Ray withdrew his life savings of $2,700 from a local bank, then flew alone to Los Angeles. Unlike the small town of Dublin, Ray found Los Angeles big, cold, and impersonal, and the atmosphere suited him. 3 minutes after arriving, he began the slow, steady search for actors, a film crew, and an affordable motel room.
This guy comes into my office. He says his name is Ray Summers. I never heard of the man, but what hit me right away was he had really poor personal hygiene. He says, "Look at this," and tosses a movie script on my desk. Well, the guy had balls. Anyway, to get rid of him, I read the script over the weekend.
How was it?
It was heavy, that I remember. Nearly 200 pages, and it was awful, really terrible. This carpet salesman terrorizes 3 kids on an iceberg in Labrador. And you know the crazy part? It would take $15 to $20 million to make it. And I told him that, and he says he could make it for $2.
$2 million?
No, $2,000.
What did you do?
What could I do? I threw him out of my office.
There was this movie part that was advertised in the Hollywood Reporter, and they were looking for an actress, right? And my agent thought I'd be perfect for it. They wanted this young woman, kind of stupid and sexy. You know, it was your typical low-budget, zero-budget slasher-type film. My agent was told that I should go to Westwood, to the Westwood Marquee, that's in Westwood, for an audition on this one particular day. So I went, and there was this guy there. He said that his name was Saperstein or Saperstein, at least that's what he said his name was. He said he was working on this very exciting project, which had 3 youths marooned on an iceberg, and that I would have a juicy and exciting role as an Eskimo, but that I would have to audition first. Well, I said, what do you want me to do? I mean, build an igloo? But he said, no, I want you to take all your clothes off.
Did you ask Terry Wilde to take her clothes off at the Westwood Marquee?
I would never ask an actress to take her clothes off unless it was called for in the script.
She said you told her to take her clothes off.
I realize that, but I never did that. The only other thing I can think of is that I asked her to change into her other costume, which would call for her to change out of her current clothes.
So I finally said, sorry, I don't want to be in your fucking movie. And he said, would it interest me to know that Eric Estrada was already cast in the lead? I said, well, who the fuck is Eric Estrada? Although I found out later he was this guy who starred in this 70s cop show or something.
I used to watch Eric Estrada on TV. I always felt he was an excellent actor. The way he used to pull people over on the highway and arrested them. I thought he brought a lot of truthful authority to the role. And I also felt that the Latino community was always underrepresented in action films. And I thought that many of them would want to go see this film for that reason.
Well, at that point, I started backing out towards the door, and I got pretty close to escaping when this Saperstein guy lunged at me with this 100-page contract that he wanted to force me to sign. And he said if I didn't sign it, I would never be in the movies again, any movie. And that's when I said, hey, buddy, you're full of shit. Nobody can stop me from working. And then I slugged him in the face. Not hard, but hard enough, right there, underneath the chin. He sort of grunted and fell backwards over this nightstand. That's when I got the hell out of there. I spent the rest of the day puking.
I got this phone call very late one night from this fellow who identified himself only as Ray. That's all he said. No last name or production company or anything like that. He said he needed a director of photography for this film he was producing and which he was going to direct himself. So I said, fine. What's it all about? Well, the guy won't come right out and tell me, you know, whether it's going to be a horror film or a sci-fi thing or a porno or whatever. I remember he sounded very secretive, like he didn't want to talk about it over the phone. That's when he asked to meet me in Beverly Hills the following afternoon, specifically at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. Not actually inside the hotel, mind you, but in this limo he said he'd be pulling up in just outside. I wasn't working then, so I went over to the hotel the following afternoon.
What happened at the hotel?
I was there for about a half an hour when this Platinum Rolls pulls up. I open the door, and in the back, I find this Ray guy. So I climb in, and before we can even say hello or good afternoon or anything like that, the guy hands me this film script all tied up neatly in a plain brown wrapper. Then, without introducing himself, he goes right into describing his film, which he says at the end he wants to shoot at night without any lights on an iceberg.
What did you say?
I said I couldn't do it. I mean, because without any lights, especially at night on a fucking iceberg, you wouldn't be able to see anything. But this guy Ray insisted that was what he wanted.
What happened then?
I told him I'd have to pass. It wouldn't work. The whole thing would look bloody stupid. That night, he called me again. Again, very secretive and paranoid. And he said, okay, there could be a light, a single flashlight. That's it. No other lights.
What did you say?
Nothing. I hung up on the man.
Defeated by Hollywood, Ray walked the entire 3,000 miles back home to Dublin. Now, 4 months behind on his mortgage and facing foreclosure, he locked himself in his bedroom and began to devise a new plan. Every other Friday, Ray cashed his Save Mart paycheck at the Dublin branch of the Huntington Savings and Loan. On each of those days, he noticed an armored car would arrive at the bank's front door promptly at 11 a.m., most likely filled with sacks of payroll cash. Casing out the bank for 10 minutes the following week, Ray decided he would rob it.
The bakery was robbed on a Thursday. We had no strong clues or motives other than what was missing, which were a dozen sugar-glazed donuts, 4 donut boxes, and a package of styrofoam cups. We suspect the thieves' original target was the bank, which was right next door. Luckily, whoever pulled the job either had no brains, no eyesight, or both, because they went in the wrong door. Even if they used the right door, the bank was empty as the armored car service had been around 2 hours earlier. There was nothing to rob, except donuts.
Where did you get the idea to rob a bank? And you just got some donuts, didn't you?
No, we got a lot more than donuts.
What did you get?
We gained valuable experience for future robberies. We learned that you have to focus if you want to get anywhere in life. We learned that it's like a donut hole. You have to go through something. You have to have something to go through it. It's like threading a needle, only with sugar on it. It's like a key in a hole. You have to have the right key to open it. And it can get messy if it's jelly-filled.
On a cold February afternoon, 4 months later, Ray was reading a book about knitting at the town's library. The day was gray and dreary, and as usual, Ray was alone. It was then that he noticed the pretty blonde sitting at the library's reference desk, 20 feet away. The girl was a lonely yet highly attractive 23-year-old, originally from Ann Arbor, Michigan, whose boyfriend had been killed in an avalanche 3 days before. Her name was Carol Ann Remke.
I was working at the town library. I'd been there for about 6 weeks when this fellow started coming in. He'd use the computer for a few minutes, and then he'd come over to the reference desk and start asking me questions, mostly about history, the Civil War, World War II, but also about other subjects like classical music, art, philosophy. At first I thought he was rather odd, but then I began to sort of feel sorry for him.
Why?
I don't know. He seemed lonely, probably because he smelled bad. Like, I don't know, rotting halibut.
When did you first notice Caroline Remke?
Oh, I used to take books out of the library, and the girl would help me find the books. I had no patience at all for the Dewey Decimal System or card catalogs and all that. If you ask a reference librarian to help you find a book, she could usually find it pretty quickly.
Was she sexy?
Yes. You could see the lines of her, you know, underneath the area.
One night after work, I went out to the parking lot. I was walking toward my car, and I saw Ray Summers sitting in his car reading Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, plus some porno magazines. About 10 seconds later, as I was getting into my car, I suddenly smelled this horrible odor, like rancid bacon just over my right shoulder. That's when everything went black. When I woke up, I found myself in this dark room, shackled to a bed with these handcuffs. I was on this bed for maybe 2 or 3 hours when the door opened and he came into the room.
Who came into the room?
Ray Summers. He came into the room carrying this small, portable TV set. He put the TV on the bed, sat down next to me, and, well, we started watching TV together. He seemed to like shows from the 60s and early 70s, and we watched maybe 4 hours of TV nonstop together. Eventually, he turned the TV off, got up off the bed, and left the room.
What happened then?
Well, if I remember correctly, soon I was hearing this music, this very loud music, which he played very loudly throughout the house for several hours without stopping. I thought I was going to go insane listening to it, but then it just stopped, just as suddenly as it started. Anyway, the next afternoon, Ray, brought me a Greek salad for lunch. When he was downstairs listening to this music, I rubbed the salad dressing all over my wrists, and I managed to slip the handcuffs off. And I ran downstairs to the back of the house through a sliding glass door, and I looked back and I saw him running after me, but I had too good of a head start, and I was too far down the driveway, so he never caught me, obviously.
What happened was I placed Miss Remke on a bed and asked her if she wanted to watch TV with me. Initially, she said no, but then I showed her the different titles that were available, and she got excited because she'd seen them on TV Land a few times before. So she thought it'd be fun. And she agreed, and we watched the TV shows. But I never actually forced her to do anything.
I reported everything to the police, but they told me that they couldn't do anything. And anyway, it'd be his word against mine. A few days later, when I was calm enough, I went back to work at the library. It's been hard. I can't eat a Greek salad or listen to classical music or even watch old TV shows without thinking about what I went through in that house.
Ray had discovered something. Kidnapping a woman, especially a young defenseless one who was also a librarian, had been easy. It was also gratifying, satisfying his strong sexual urges, now totally compulsive and uncontrollable. Almost immediately, he began cruising the area for other similar victims, this time in his own car.
I've reviewed the case of Mr. Bobby Ray Summers. In my professional opinion, the patient manifests obvious symptoms of extreme repression and also an acute degree of neuroticism. The results, again in my opinion, of a profound lack of adult supervision from early to late childhood. The patient's deviant sexual behavior, originating here in the prefrontal cortex of the human brain, can be traced to a prolonged social isolation as well as an abnormally low self-esteem. Finally, the patient's obsession with Mozart is clearly related to the absence of a strong father figure, as Mozart was a great mentor to the young Amadeus, taking the boy everywhere he traveled. The patient sees Mozart as an example of the person he might have become, and not the person he actually is. Despite these obvious handicaps, as long as Mr. Summers takes his medications, including a strict regimen of powerful antibiotics to control his skin condition, he should be able to function like anyone else.
He doesn't take any medications.
He doesn't take any medication? Well, he should be taking medications. Here's one.
You searched for more women to abduct. Do you think you were out of control at that point?
I never got out of control, as you call it. I've always known exactly what I was doing and had complete control over my impulses. The only time I get out of control is when I eat candy bars. I'll eat like Nestle's Crunch Bar, and I can't stop eating it, so I'll eat and eat until I've eaten about 20 candy bars. That's like milkshakes and oatmeal.
It was at Ryan's Diner, popular with locals for its steak and eggs breakfasts and high-fat dinners, where Ray caught the eye of another young defenseless woman. Like Ray's first victim, Sarah Jane Smith was fun-loving, attractive, and used her middle name.
I was a waitress at this diner off the interstate. I worked days sometimes, but mostly I worked the night shift. This guy usually came in around 5:30 or 6. You know, he was older looking, around 45 maybe. I guess you could say he was good looking in a creepy sort of way. When he came in, he'd always order the same thing. Steak, very rare, with mashed potatoes and gravy. He said he likes it rare because he liked to see the little rivers of blood flowing along the edge of the plates. One night he came in at his usual time, ordered his usual bloody steak, only this time he told me that his dog had died, which was like the first personal thing that he had ever said to me. Well, I felt sort of sorry for the guy because, you know, I owned a dog too. I told him I was sorry about his dog. That's when he asked me out. This first time he asked me out, I said no, because I do not date strangers. And, you know, he was practically a stranger to me. But then, I guess around a week later, he asked me out again, and I said, okay, because now I was even sadder because my dog had died too.
What happened with Sarah Jane Smith?
Oh, I have a weakness for hamburgers. And there was this diner 3 miles away from my home. The burgers there were very greasy and fatty. And they had excellent French fries, too. And I met her there. She served me the food. And I, obviously, over time, began probably to associate her with the food she was serving me. I can't explain it beyond that.
We went out to McDonald's. Afterwards, I suggested that we go to this bar that I knew. He agreed, but instead of going to the bar, and this is where I should have been more suspicious, he drove to the nearest pharmacy, bought some condoms, and then drove to a liquor store and came out with a 6-pack of beer. We were out in his car for about 2 hours drinking beer, and he asked me what it was like being a waitress, and I told him, you know, the lousy wages. We drank for a while and we listened to classical music on his radio. Around 9:30, he suggested that we go back to his house. You know, I must have been totally drunk by then because I said, okay. We drove about 3 miles to this tiny house outside of town, and we went inside, and that's when he suggested that we go upstairs and see his upstairs bathroom. Suddenly, the next thing I know, I'm completely naked and handcuffed to this whirlpool filled with swirling hot water. The first thing he did after he handcuffed me was start telling me jokes. Bad jokes. Like jokes I had first heard back in high school. This time though, when I didn't laugh or even fake laugh, he started threatening me with this thick 200-page movie script that he had written. I really did not want to read his script because, like, you know, I really don't like to read. I think I was in this whirlpool for 2 days. I remember too because I made these little markings on the wall next to the bathtub.
I invited her to my home and she accepted. The whirlpool was entirely her idea. She told me she was stressed out from being in the restaurant all day. And when she saw the whirlpool, she got excited. She sort of jumped in without me pushing her. And there was a script sitting there. She picked it up, she read it, she liked it. She asked me if I'd written anything else. So I showed her a couple other things I had written. I didn't force her to read anything.
One day he came in and said, "Okay, it's over." He didn't need me anymore. He said he'd run out of jokes to tell and bad scripts to threaten me with, and that I was free to go. As soon as I made it past the front door, I ran. I ran down this creepy road all the way to the diner where I worked the night shift.
By 2003, Ray was still employed at the Save Mart. Considered friendly by his co-workers and reliable by his supervisors, he was now earning close to $300 a week. At the same time, and just under the eyes of all around him, Ray continued to scour Dublin for new people to kidnap. Unlike Sarah Jane Smith or Carol Ann Remke, one of Ray's victims was neither young, blonde, or even a woman. Morris Pepke was a 55-year-old independent insurance agent. Married with 3 teenage daughters, Pepke's modus operandi was simple. He'd telephone a homeowner daily for 3 weeks. Then, unannounced and with no appointment, he'd visit the victim's home, usually in the evening, gaining entrance just before dinner time. Once in the home, Pepke would attempt to sell his victim insurance. Morris Pepke was persistent, successful, and a pest. His only mistake, his last mistake, was pestering Bobby Ray Summers.
Did you kill Morris Pepke?
This man Pepke came to my house uninvited after he called me on the phone a number of times. He was very annoying and obnoxious. He kept calling me sir, sir all the time. But I told him I didn't want to buy any insurance. But he stayed.
You told the police Pepke got up to leave, and then you stabbed him 4 times with a screwdriver.
No, that's incorrect.
What is? Did you stab him?
Yes, but not 4 times. I stabbed him with a pen once on the hand just to get him to leave. But he stayed. He got up, and he was bleeding, and he was still trying to sell me a policy. I couldn't get him to stop. It was totally an act of self-defense.
Apart from his victims, no one in Dublin had yet realized the extent of Ray Summers' crimes. One contributing factor was his total anonymity. Except for his immediate family, his supervisor at the Save Mart, and his dentist, few people in town knew Ray Summers existed. Making matters worse, despite his love of classical music, poor personal hygiene, and low self-esteem, women found Ray interesting, even attractive, easy targets for his lust-saturated fantasies. In the end, it was left to Dublin's only full-time homicide detective, P. Escobar, to link Summers to the string of abductions plaguing the area.
We found the bodies in this wooded area on the ground between these 2 trees. Both victims had been bound and gagged, and except for one shoe, both were naked. It appears the victims were strangled, most likely with a wire cord of some kind. I've been on the police force here for about 8 months. Even with that limited knowledge of the area, I suspected Ray Summers from the very beginning.
Why was that?
Why? Because he was the only person I knew stupid enough to leave various personal items behind at the crime scenes.
Like what?
Like his passport, plus a book of German philosophy, which he checked out of the public library and was 9 weeks overdue on.
Okay, I'd lost my passport 4 days earlier when I was at the library. It appears that someone either stole it or found it on the ground and never returned it, and it ended up somewhere else.
Who could have stolen?
Someone who had access to my home or car.
Like who?
Could have been anyone who hated me. And that was a lot of folks.
In my opinion, Ray Summers was a vicious, brutal criminal with absolutely no respect for human life. As such, I trust he will remain in jail forever, or almost forever. The possibility that somehow he may be innocent, it doesn't change my mind one bit.
Barbara Jo Fulton was a 24-year-old suburban housewife. Young, sexually stimulating, and extremely lonely. She was food shopping for her family one afternoon when Ray spotted her from a nearby aisle from behind a can of floor wax. Normally, nothing about Bobby Ray Summers would have been attractive to a happily married mother of two like Barbara Jo Fulton. It was a shared interest in film, horror movies in particular, that sealed the young woman's fate. She would be Ray's next and final victim.
I was in the supermarket shopping for food for my family. I was reading the nutritional information on a package of ground lamb, and this man started talking to me. He was about 40, average looking. Actually, I was a little repulsed by his bad skin. It looked like someone had poured a can of battery acid over his head. He started talking to me about meat. He asked me why I had selected lamb instead of chicken, which he said had far less fat content. I remember he had this way of making you feel important, even interesting. And that was definitely a turn on, at least for me. My husband, Greg, was a cheese salesman, and he was on the road a lot. In retrospect, I guess I was just lonely and looking for someone to talk to, even a stranger talking about lamb. About a week later, I ran into him in the supermarket again. This time it was by the dairy case. I thought, is he stalking me? You know, showing up every day, hoping that he'd see me? He asked me out this time, and I thought, get the hell out of there. But we started talking, and it turns out that we both like films, you know, going to the movies. We were talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which we had both seen on cable the night before.
What happened was true.
He seemed okay. 4 days later, he picked me up at a local gas station and we went to the movies. And then we went to the Rum Line, which was this bar on the edge of town. We had a few drinks and he asked if I wanted to see his DVD collection.
How did you meet Barbara Jo Fulton?
We used the same supermarket and one day ran into her shopping. She was very pretty. But I also noticed she was buying a lot of red meat. Cheap, fatty red meat. Not the good kind of red meat, which I don't think anyone should buy, especially adults with high cholesterol and heart conditions. I advised her that she shouldn't buy red meat, and I think she appreciated the comment. And she called me 3 days later, and we went to a movie.
Did she call you, or did you call her?
I think we called each other at the exact same moment.
I guess I was a little drunk, so I said okay. We drove to his house. It was about 2 miles outside of town, and we just sat and talked. I'm not exactly sure when, but I fell asleep at some point, and when I woke up, I found out that someone had tied me to a tree. An oak, I think. I can't be exactly sure where I was because it was really dark then, but I know that my first reaction was, Jesus, I'm tied to this fucking tree in the middle of the forest, and this nutcase is gonna kill me somehow, and I'm gonna be dead.
She says you tied her to a tree. Did you do that?
Yes, that's correct. I did tie her to a tree.
Why?
Because she asked me to. I know that sounds very strange, but she asked me to do that. So I did it. I tied her to a tree. It was a chestnut tree. And I'd do it again if she asked me to. But I don't think she ever will.
Sometime in the middle of the night, Ray Summers, appeared with a plastic bag full of these little marshmallows. He built a small fire by my feet, and he started toasting the marshmallows over the fire. I was tied up, so he had to feed them to me. A half an hour later, he asked if we could sing some songs together. He specifically wanted to sing campfire songs because he said he had never had a true campfire experience when he was young. The next morning, he appeared with a few pieces of stale bread and a small bowl of porridge, which he fed to me. He went away, and when he came back, he was carrying a chainsaw.
He said it was a leaf blower.
I know he said it was a leaf blower, but he's been lying about that. It was a chainsaw. He turned it on, and he was waving it in front of me like he was going to cut me up in a million little pieces, like in that movie that we'd seen the night before.
Did you attack Barbara Jo Fulton with a chainsaw?
I don't even own a chainsaw, so there's no way I could have done that.
What about a leaf blower?
Why would I attack someone with a leaf blower? That's completely stupid and ridiculous.
Do you own a leaf blower?
Yes, I own a leaf blower, but it's not very good, and it's not working properly right now. And I usually have to rake afterward anyway. So the whole idea of attacking someone with a non-working leaf blower that doesn't blow is preposterous.
He started digging a hole a few feet away from me. When he had finished digging the hole, he lined it with this plastic sheeting that he had brought with him. I guess he wasn't paying attention because he stepped on the edge of the shovel and it sprung up and hit him on the side of the head. He fell on the ground and I guess he knocked himself out because he didn't move after that. I used the shovel to cut through the ropes and then I ran like mad, away through the woods.
It was here where we found two more bodies, both female. One of them, Lacey Ann Drew, 25 years old, I discovered myself. She was naked, and one of her legs were cut off at the knee, probably with a chainsaw. The second victim, also 25, was found up that hill by Detective Lane. The only real clues in this case? Several feet from the victim, we found a music CD, Cosi fan tutti by W.A. Mozart, along with a cheap paperback novel entitled Man's Search for Meaning, which we understood to be a philosophy book read by liberals in colleges and universities. I've worked in some pretty tough areas, Brooklyn, Jersey, and the only thing I've seen worse was that old 60s TV show. What was it called?
My Mother, the Car?
That's right. My Mother, the Car.
Suddenly tired of holding defenseless young women against their will, and once again finding himself desperately short of cash, Ray needed money, sacks of it, the kind of money that would free him from the need to work, preferably for the rest of his life. On a cold February evening in January, while reading back issues of the National Enquirer at the town library, Ray came across a story that was to stay with him for hours. The story concerned a Florida woman named Georgia O'Leary. O'Leary, an eccentric but extremely wealthy fast food heiress, had been kidnapped at gunpoint by a desperate Guatemalan sailor on a lonely road just outside Naples, Florida. Held for 3 weeks in the basement of a taco stand near Miami, O'Leary was finally released after a $3.5 million cash ransom was paid by her family. Almost immediately, Ray began to search for his own Georgia O'Leary. Hattie McDaniel was an elderly black woman, a former jazz pianist who had amassed a small fortune investing in junk bonds. McDaniel lived alone in a suburban condominium complex just south of Boston. On a cold, drizzly afternoon in March, after watching McDaniel's home for several minutes, Ray crouched behind some trash cans, then grabbed the unsuspecting woman as she left her apartment to visit friends. Unfortunately for Ray, his research about his victim had been wrong. Hattie McDaniel knew nothing about junk bonds and had little, if any, money. In reality, Hattie McDaniel was a widowed grandmother of 16, now living on welfare.
Oh, he was a nice, pleasant young man, as far as I could tell. Never hurt me even once. I have to say, he was a little impatient, always wanting to get out the house and do something, like drive around the block, get a slice of pizza, get a couple of DVDs at the video place. Man was always talking about going somewhere, like Mexico, South America, some such nonsense.
How'd you get the idea to kidnap Hattie McDaniel?
Oh, I was driving down the street, and I saw Miss McDaniel was fixing the tire in her car. She asked me to help her, and so I did. I helped her fix the tire in her car. And we got to talking, and as it turned out, we were both interested in music. We went back to her house, and she played a little while for me. And from that point on, we started hanging out together. But I didn't kidnap her at all.
She says you kidnapped her and that you were nervous and fidgety.
Nervous and fidgety? Ugh. Well, that describes about half the people in the United States, doesn't it?
I remember he seemed confused and sarcastic. That's it. He was very sarcastic and always making jokes about the police and how not in a million years they'd ever catch him because they were stupid. I told him he was stupid for kidnapping me, and he should look to the Lord above for forgiveness. He did that, and then he let me go.
Determined more than ever before to change his luck, Ray searched quickly for a new victim. Abigail Adams Smythe Adams was a Massachusetts blue blood. A wealthy foam cushion heiress, Smythe Adams lived alone on her family's colonial-era horse farm on the outskirts of Dublin. Ray was careful not to repeat the mistakes he had made with Hattie McDaniel. On a cool November night in April, after parking on a nearby road, Ray began watching the Smythe Adams estate from his car through a pair of binoculars. 4.5 minutes later, he made his move, abducting the 68-year-old heiress at knife point as she left her home to visit friends.
It was difficult at first, being abducted and all. However, now that I've had time to think about it, I think the fellow was sort of, well, rather pleasant.
Pleasant?
Yes, that's right. He enjoyed music, as I do. He also enjoyed literature, as I do as well. On the other hand, he seemed somewhat confused, preoccupied, I might say, with his skin and with his parents, who apparently lived nearby. He also was rather odd-looking.
In what way?
Well, the whole time, he wore a white plastic goalie's mask like he was playing hockey. And at other times, a black woolen cap, as if he were going outdoors to shovel snow. In any event, he never hurt me, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm especially grateful to my friends and to that nice Detective Escobar who arrived to rescue me, and just in time.
As police close in on the Smythe farmhouse, Ray narrowly escapes, using a rear bulkhead door. Hiding first in nearby woods, he employs a combination of high-speed train lines and local taxi services to evade police, arriving 16 hours later, annoyed and unshaven, at his parents' home 3 miles away.
Ray came in one night. He was cold and shivering, and also, well, very bloody. He told us he needed a place to stay for a while, just for a few years, I think he said. We asked him what had happened, and he mumbled something about the police. And then he mumbled something about kidnapping a woman. Then he mumbled something about going to prison, and that's when I knew he needed a diction course.
We could tell that he was in some kind of trouble. That night over dinner, I demanded he tell us what was wrong.
Yes, that's when he told us about...
Kidnapping?
No, not about the kidnappings, about his acne, that it was almost under control, this time for good. We were very happy, of course. But then, 3 nights later, we heard the sirens and the loudspeakers and the dogs. That's when we knew Ray was in trouble again.
I confronted him in the basement where he was building something.
What was he building?
We didn't know at the time. We found out later on it was a low-yield nuclear weapon to use against the police in case they cornered him.
He told us he had to go, and not just downtown this time. He said this time he had to go far, far away, someplace where he could never be found.
What did you do?
What could we do? We beat him with a clothesline.
For 2 months, Ray hides in a small broom closet just off the laundry room. As always, however, he's unable to take Doris and Leo's constant bickering. Forced to escape once more, he hotwires his father's Oldsmobile, then heads south. But with bad eyesight and even poor map-reading skills, Ray mistakenly heads north instead. ending up 6.5 days and 1,500 miles later in the Canadian province of Labrador. Ray Summers' next telephone call, his last as a free man, would be to his lawyer.
Ray called me from a payphone in Labrador. He called collect because he was broke. He told me that he was scouting locations for a big film epic. Later on in the conversation, he broke down. He told me why he was there. It was because of something that he had done here, and the police were looking for him. He needed a good lawyer, and he told me he was completely innocent. And I told him, look, Ray, you gotta come home, kid. You gotta come back from Labrador. And he did. He borrowed a dog sled team to come back with. Anyway, it took him about 6 days to get back here. We agreed to meet. We went to Denny's. Had a nice dinner, too.
Anything unusual about him?
Anything unusual about him? No, not that I can remember. Yeah, you know what there was? He had a lot of blood on his hands and his face, but he told me he got that when he was using the whip on the dogs for the dog sled team to come back with. He also told me that he was ready to rejoin society as a law-abiding citizen. And I'm not talking about some Mozart-loving whack job that goes off in the woods and reads books all afternoon.
Bobby, a lawyer said you were misunderstood.
Actually, it was the other way around. I didn't understand my lawyer most of the time.
How so?
Well, he was always using these legal terms that I didn't understand at all. You know, crap he probably learned in law school. Also, whenever I left a message, he never returned my call. And whenever I called him collect, he always told me to get a phone card. So, all in all, I think the guy was a worthless piece of shit.
Listen, let me tell you something about Ray Summers. Except for the one individual that he admitted keeping in his basement for a few days, and another one that he allegedly threatened with a leaf blower, mind you, my client is completely innocent. I'll tell you something about Ray Summers. Ray Summers is a sarcastic, angry, misunderstood young man with a terrible skin condition who also has a sensitive side. He's very good with the elderly. He loves his parents. And more importantly, he knew when to stop.
Yeah. Ray Summers, he came into my cell, which I had personally cleaned myself the month before. And I could tell immediately that he was very unclean, what you might call unsanitary. And he had this big blood stain on his shirt, so I knew the guy was tough.
Was he intelligent?
Intelligent? Yeah, maybe a little bit, but also stupid in kind of a clever way. I mean, if that's possible. The first night, now we've been in the cell together for about maybe an hour and a half, and he's already talking about how he was going to escape. Now, normally, most guys start to think of escape only after being inside for maybe 5 or 6 years. You know, when they're just about to go nuts and tear their own heads off. But this guy, Ray Summers, he was thinking about it almost immediately, within the first half hour.
What'd you say? Did you go along?
Nah! I told him I thought he was crazy for even thinking about it. Considering we're in this 2-foot-thick concrete room being watched 24 hours a day by 18 video cameras, plus the guards, the alarms, and everything, I told him he should think about something else. I told him he should sit down and knit something. Yeah, me, I knitted a wool ladder. Did I ever use it? You think I would be here talking to you if I did?
What's it like in prison?
Prison's pretty bad. Very limiting. You have to stay in your cell 23 hours a day, except to shower and get raped. I have no friends. I stay in my cell a lot, watch TV, read books.
What are you reading?
Novels mostly. Trashy novels like Stephen King, some of the Harry Potter stuff. I also read Mad Magazine a lot.
Do you deserve to spend the rest of your life in prison?
I think I should spend eternity in prison. Then they should let me go.
Do you like people?
Yeah, I like people. I've always liked people, especially people who are shorter than me or who wear hats. If anyone got hurt during this entire ordeal, I truly apologize. And I can assure everyone listening that it'll never, ever happen again. At least in this state.
Ich sah diese Anzeige in einem Filminstitut. Und dort suchte man eine Hauptdarstellerin für einen großen Hollywood-Film mit Stars wie Brad Pitt oder Tom Cruise und anderen Hollywood-Stars. Es heißt, man sucht wunderschöne und sexy Frauen aus Osteuropa mit blonden Haaren und blauen Augen. Also habe ich mich gedacht, was soll's? Ich gehe also auf Casting im Haus von diesem Typen Ray Bobby, mitten in der Pampa, eine kleine Hütte. Die Tür öffnet sich und drinnen ist dieser durchschnittliche Typ mittleren Alters. Als ich drin war, merkte ich, dass der Kerl nach rotem Fleisch roch. Aber er sagte, dass ich sehr schön bin und mit guter war, in einem Film entweder sie eine Bibliothekarin oder eine Prostituierte zu spielen. Ich fragte, soll ich etwas vorspielen? Und er sagt, nein, ich will, dass du dich komplett aussiehst. Ich dachte, dieser Kerl ist doch ein komplett Arschloch und Wichter. Ich sagte, ich gehe, tschüss, und machte ich auf den Weg. Aber dann begann dieser Arschloch-Ray zu heulen, behauptete unter Krokodilstrauen, dass sein Hund gestorben sei. Dann entschuldigte er sich, dass er mich hier rausfahren lassen ließ. Und bevor ich mich versah, tranken wir ein deutsches Bier zusammen. Und nach 10 Minuten fand ich mich in einem dunklen Kellergewölbe wieder, gefesselt an den Boiler. Dort für vielleicht 10 Minuten, als dieser Ray hereinkam, komplett nackt. Sein Schwanz schwang wild in der Gegend herum. Er hielt eine Kettensäge. Ich konnte nicht davon rennen, weil ich noch an den Boiler gefesselt war. Er hatte mit mich Handschellen an der Heißkessel gekettet, sodass ich nicht entkommen würde. Ich dachte, jetzt sterbe ich wegen einem Arschloch mit Kettensäge. Aber dann sagte der Wichser, er hatte mich nur getestet, wie ich in einem seinem Film spielen würde. Er sagte, ich könnte gehen, solle aber am nächsten Tag wiederkommen für ein weiteres Casting. Niemals. Ich würde nicht mehr in das Haus von irgendeinem Arschloch irgendwo in der Pampa gehen, nur für eine scheiße Filmrolle. Ich mag Amerika. Also diesen Typen Bobby, der offensichtlich ein schleimiges Arschloch ist.
I think that Bobby Ray Summers is a lonely, horny nebbish who likes classical music. I enjoy working at the library, except for when men abduct you and handcuff you to a bed in their house.
I don't think I'm qualified to analyze Ray Summers. I just hope that he's being seen by a professional. And I don't mean a dentist or a lawyer. I mean some doctor at a mental hospital.
I still think of him from time to time. Usually when I'm watching a horror movie. Maybe he'll call me one day.
Did you ever kill anybody?
No. Absolutely no. Never killed anyone. What happens is people hang out with me for a little while, and then they tend to disappear. I never intended to kill anyone or make them disappear. I like people, except when they annoy me, and then I get nervous and irritable. At which point, anything could happen.